Hey everyone, we are joined by Hamaguchi-san, director of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and we're going to be talking a little bit about the game and the process of making it and the legacy of it. Hamaguchi-san, thank you so much for joining us. We'd like to begin by talking about the history of, you with Final Fantasy. It was the game that inspired you to be a developer, right? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So right about, when I was in middle school was when I played these games. And at the time, I think a very primary source of entertainment at the time was like shonen manga or like comics geared towards sort of like young, guys were sort of like a very primary source of entertainment. But then in terms of video games, there was not so much of like a very story focused experience. I think that could be found in titles from then. And Final Fantasy VI and FF7 was this totally new experience for me, in which it really goes into this really in-depth narrative, all the while providing these really amazing characters and gameplay. So it was just this totally new video game experience to me that was both new and completely exhilarating for me at the time. And I really it showed me the sort of potential of video games, and I was very much moved by it. And I think looking back now, I think it really served as a sort of origin or point where it inspired me to become a game creator.
Without talking about anything that happens in this game, one of the kind of key moments that I remember when I played it that made me change the way I think about video games is the scene with Aerith and Sephiroth. Do you remember what it was like for you when you played that? Because for me, it was devastating.
Yeah, it was totally the same for me as well, kind of that devastating feeling. But also considering sort of the media at the time and films and other sources of entertainment, I think it was very much sort of a common theme for, those who passed away or, to almost come back or, be sort of, come back to life in some way. So, so this was a really new kind of way that we were expressing this, and in the way I think it was really shocking. And I remember, sort of Japanese players at the time, also just thinking there was some way that you could have, Aerith live, and they were frantically searching for some way to do that.
After joining Square, what happened to your relationship with Final Fantasy? Because now you're not just a fan, you are helping create the games. And has your relationship changed with Final Fantasy over the years? And especially now that you are the director of Rebirth?
So it's been, almost about 25 years since I joined Square Enix, working on the Final Fantasy series. At the time when I joined, I had worked on 12, and then going on towards 13, as well as other titles as well. And, of course, in that process, just kind of working on these various titles, as well as among these very skilled, creators, I think I was really able to hone my sort of sensibilities that allowed me to grow as a developer. And when Kitase-san had sort of approached me initially, sort of with becoming a sort of director for Rebirth, I almost felt the sense of kismet or fate in some way that now these titles that severely immensely impacted and influenced me as a child, and almost led to me being inspired to become this creator. Now I'm able to be involved and in a sense sort of give back to these titles that formed me, was the sense of feeling.
Even with that extensive experience in working in games and making Final Fantasy games, I imagine it was still very daunting to be on the 7 remake team. And throughout production, I'm sure it was very anxiety-inducing knowing that you're working on this game. What did it feel like after the game was released and you saw how positively people were receiving it? Do you remember what the team mood was, or how everyone responded to that?
When considering the sort of original titles, graphics, of course, the sort of graphic expression was kind of done so in the realm of, the PlayStation console. So there wasn't like that much detail to be expressed in the scenes, and a lot of it was kind of up to the user's imagination. And this time with the remake series and the remake title itself, I think we were able to sort of answer that and sort of meet the sort of expectations of the fans in what they had imagined, sort of the Cloud and Sephiroth's, encounters to now be kind of envisioned in this modern way that was very much satisfying to them. And I think we were able to sort of meet that in the way that kind of helped us, gain these positive responses. Once a project or, development ends on a title, it's often such that like the team members that had worked on that project would then kind of disperse and go on to work on, a variety of other titles. But in the case of Remake, what happened was a majority of the members that worked on this title had kind of stayed on to now work on Rebirth. And so in that way, we were able to really retain this sort of knowledge and experience of working together on Remake, and then now embark on this new challenge of, kind of tackling this second title within the trilogy. So in that way, I think that what also really led to us kind of being able to create this extremely solid, like high quality game within 4 years' time, receiving this very highly positive feedback from the users from Remake really led to these positive results within the team.
Were you apprehensive at all about following up Remake with Rebirth when you are approaching the projects? Obviously, a lot of things are diverging in terms of story and characters. So what was the mood as you were embarking upon this game?
So in terms of sort of like apprehension and any types of those feelings, I don't think we had that when we were, going from Remake into Rebirth. When, creating sort of a remake series, if we're sort of approaching it as something that's just purely sort of a continuation of the former title, there's no real sort of like, excitement there or for the fans. And I felt it was necessary for us to kind of continue to sort of evolve and sort of grow, build upon the titles that we've worked on as we head towards the third title. And so from the get-go, we made it sort of our challenge to kind of embark on this world map, and we were very much sort of determined to make this work. So there wasn't that kind of feeling, much more so like determination.
One of the things I really like about Rebirth is the way that the combat system has been tweaked to reflect one of the core themes of the game and the experience that the team has had, the crew has had up until that point, in that synergy is kind of like a representation of their friendship and the experiences they had, which is really clever when you're trying to improve the combat system and the gameplay. How did you settle upon that, and what was the process of getting to the idea of like, oh, we can show how close they are as friends and comrades by introducing this mechanic into the combat?
So when we consider also sort of mechanics within like other games that we find to be very wonderful, I think perhaps a common thread that we can find is that if there is something that is sort of aligned to its worldview or sort of the general sort of essence of the game that is also incorporated into the system, it makes it feel very sort of natural, and there's kind of an ease at using such systems. And so when Nojima-san had presented us with his initial scenario, I'd really looked to his scenario as sort of a basis to find somewhat of like a keyword or core element that I wanted to design these elements based on as well. So for Rebirth, as we follow the character's journey, we are looking into depicting each character's emotions and how they sort of interact with each other, and this kind of idea of depicting the bonds between the team. And so kind of naturally from thinking on this idea of the bonds between the characters, then we kind of came on to the growth systems, got the combat system, and also implementing this core theme in there as well.
How do you approach making changes to a game as iconic as Final Fantasy VII, whether that's through gameplay or delving deeper into certain parts of the story or even changing it?
So there was, mainly two main points that I was especially mindful of in sort of designing Rebirth. First was that, considering that Final Fantasy VII is such a well-known, IP, we wanted to somewhat sort of leverage this fact that so many users are familiar with the storyline. Now, kind of adding, elements that are different and unique to the story that will kind of take the players by surprise. This may be something like the, whispers in Remake, and then for this title, Zack is somewhat of a key figure that kind of takes on this role. So by kind of placing these elements in somewhat of like a way that makes these changes quite obvious, I think it creates this feeling of excitement and almost sort of like a positive anxiety within the players that kind of keeps everyone guessing and keeps people on their toes to feel like you don't really know the whole story throughout. So that was one element that I was particularly mindful of. And secondly, when we look back at the original Final Fantasy VII, we weren't able to quite depict everything in detail due to the sort of technological limitations at the time, which we are now able to. So it's not so much that like the storyline or setting itself isn't largely changed, but there may be parts that the impression that the players are now getting from that scene is different from what they had experienced in the original, simply due to sort of the level of detail that we're now able to convey. An example of which is in the Nibelheim flashback, in which now like we can see that Cloud's expressions and sort of movements at the time feel very much like Zack, and this was something that was originally intended, but perhaps people are now kind of discovering this for the first time, and so we have this new discovery here. So those 2 points, being able to sort of depict changes from that deviate from the original story, that keep this excitement going, as well as putting in more detail into places that give users this sort of new discovery. 2 parts are 2 main points that I took was quite careful of in Rebirth.
One of the things that I wanted to talk about is Queen's Blood, which is brilliant. I think it's incredible. Who came up with that? How did you design that? And would you ever consider releasing a physical version of it? Because it's pretty awesome.
So as far as wanting to kind of put in this card game, that was initially my idea of wanting to create this card game for Rebirth. And when thinking about sort of the various mini games represented in Rebirth, I sort of like put them in different categories. Some may be sort of one-off type of games, and others may be kind of within a specific area or region. And then some may be sort of long-term mini games that are just played throughout the game for users. And so when considering what could we kind of design as sort of a long-term mini game that players can play throughout their Rebirth experience, when looking back at some of the Final Fantasy mainline titles, many of which that kind of led itself into being played long-term were card games. So we thought instead of kind of like starting from zero and devising something completely new and different, perhaps let's try to create this very solid and exciting card game that I think would bring about a more feeling of like familiarity that people will want to keep playing. And so we started from there, and then now that we settled on creating this card game, I wanted to find people who would help me develop this. And so within sort of the developer team, we had certain staff that were very much into card games. So we kind of formed almost like a 5-person like card game unit. And within us, we discussed like other card games that were really, exciting and fun for us. And so, possible rules. So we spent about like a year or so really digging deep into this and discussing like what is Queen's Blood going to look like. And then, we even like made like mock-ups with paper, or like we used like, Windows application to create something kind of like a basic sort of designs of it and such. So, we spent about like a year before actually going into like developing and creating Queen's Blood like within the game. And you also asked about whether there was ever like a physical card deck or cards created. And so yes, there was, but not necessarily to kind of like check or do any tests on the game, but it was because like towards near the end of developing Rebirth, some of the team like loved Queen's Blood so much that they used our in-office 3D printer to create like a 1-to-1 scale model of like Queen's Blood, and then like printed the cards, laminated them, and like created the entire deck for it. So it's currently displayed in our office.
本当にそのままのものを作って今社内に飾ってあるんです。
When it comes to the other mini games, obviously there are so many in Rebirth. What are your favorites?
一番のお気に入りとやっぱクイーンズブラッドは
So in terms of the mini games, of course I'd have to say my top favorite is Queen's Blood, but the answer is a little bit standard. So to kind of talk about some other mini games too, I do think like games like the Chocobo Race, as well as sort of the shooting games, are also really enjoyable. And for Rebirth, we also took the mini game that was featured in Yuffie's intermission DLC, Fort Condor, and this has been kind of now arranged and sort of evolved for Rebirth, in that now characters like Cloud and Tifa are also expressed within this mini game, and you can play them as well, and it's like a very fun experience. And there's also one more that I really like. If you remember Final Fantasy XII, there was that the Gambit system that we were very much inspired by. And so there's this sort of game where there's a robot and there's sort of a Gambit type element to it. And it's like a strategic simulation game. In which you control the robots, and there's a lot of like kind of customization aspects to it, and that can be really extremely fun. And I really oversaw the creation of this mini game, like down to like the different difficulties and such were sort of also looked over by me. So it's really fun, and I think I really look forward to people playing it.
非常にいい面白いものになってるんで、そこはぜひプレイしてみてもらいたいなと思います。
Without spoiling anything, obviously, how much of the third game do you know how it's going to happen, how it's going to play out? Is that something that right now you know the ending to, or is it a case of you're going to sit down with the other members of the team and craft the next chapter?
ストーリーに関しては
There is already sort of an initial draft of the scenario for the third title from Najima-san. So the sort of overall, direction and sort of overarching storyline of it, I know from that and from reading that. But as far as sort of determining, sort of the overall, I guess, sort of vision and how to go about expressing this and how to sort of convey this to the team is something that I still need to kind of ponder on. So lately I've been going on these long walks around my neighborhood to wait for inspiration to strike.
っていうのをずっと模索してます。
Big question. Are you a Tifa, Aerith, or Barrett date person?
So, kind of outside of those three characters, my favorite is actually the Red 13 date. So that's kind of my top recommendation. But among those three, I personally like the Barrett date, mostly because in the original, I think the Tifa and Aerith date were just like the two topmost, like focused upon dates that everyone, kind of talked about. The Barrett date had more of sort of like a comical vibe, I think, in the original. But for this time around, it really kind of goes into sort of that, strong sort of relationship and sort of the bond of like trust between Cloud and Barrett. And so I really like how that's presented there. And for Red 13 date as well, it's really comical, very funny. So I hope people play that as well.
Final question, which is more of a request that we feel like as fans of Final Fantasy XII, we have to ask. What are the chances you could remake that next, given how successful 7 is? And please do it.
I guess, purely sort of hypothetically speaking, if someone had approached me saying, Hamaguchi, please direct, 12 and 12 remake, I might decline politely. But if someone else were to create this, I would love to play it all the same.
Yeah, that's fine for us. As long as it happens, that's fine for us. Hamaguchi-san, thank you so much for taking the time out to come and speak to us. And thank you for watching. If you want to see more Final Fantasy VII Rebirth coverage, you can go to GameSpot.com or go to youtube.com/GameSpot. We'll see you later.